き割りおしまい。
All right, Dragon Ballers, we are back with another episode of Get the Mic. We hope you enjoyed that little trailer we're going to play at the beginning. It kind of sums up where we are so far in the series. This is Get the Mic. I'm your host on the left, Al.
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
And this is the show where we dissect fiction for its mythological significance. We're happy to be live with you on this Sunday. We do have some addendums and some housekeeping stuff to get through. So I think we should go ahead and start doing that. First thing, housekeeping stuff. Like we said, we also have a trailer too. That trailer is its own video if you want to go watch that. As far as going forward, we are going to have a hiatus in the near future, probably in a couple weeks. It's not going to be very long, but we may have a pause in our video production.
Mm-hmm.
Also, we should be doing another Myth and Movies, and we're also going to try and do a channel trailer at some point. So stay tuned for all that good stuff. And if you aren't, please subscribe, give us a like, leave a comment telling us what you think about what is said in the video. Anything else you got to say there, Brock?
No, I think that was pretty concise.
All right, well, let's go ahead and get into our first addendum. So I think the first thing you wanted to bring up was about the last episode, the end of Commander Red.
Right. Generally, just want to try to get the last of our thoughts out about the whole Commander Red situation and what he does in this last episode. Had some thoughts about how this ties into, we got to the end of the episode and we had a bit of a discussion about sort of the duality of the modes of being between, let's say, Goku and Black and the way that they acted in terms of a quote-unquote master, right? So it was at the end of 66, actually, right before the beginning of 67, where there's a situation where Red he's observing Goku as he's breaking through the floors up the tower towards them. And he gets angry and he says, the Red Ribbon Army is not going to be beaten by some kid who doesn't know how to use an elevator. When he says that, then the frame zooms in very slowly on Black's face as he stares at Red when he says that. And that's right towards the end of the episode. And when I saw that, I was
that's
like,
a real
interesting.
bind, or the Red Ribbon Army desperately fights back, right?
Right. And so coming into the situation at the end of the episode, or at the end of Red's whole situation, where he tells Black, you're going to fight Goku and I'm going to go up the elevator and I'm going to go to my room, right? And it's the room where the floor is such that Goku can't break through it with his head, right?
Right.
it really struck me that there's an interesting dynamic there in what he's doing, right? That is Red's final attack. That he would put himself up at the top of the tower, let's say, in a
Mm.
room where you would have to use the elevator to get to it, right? And he says specifically, we're not going to be bested by a kid who doesn't know how to use an elevator. And that's to say, this space that I've designated as the top of my hierarchy, you cannot come into through your own means. You have to go through my means. You have to go through using the elevator. You could say elevating yourself through the ranks of the Red Ribbon Army, even in the hierarchical sense that I consider it to be, right? And so, leading up to this,
Well,
Red has been
also,
demeaning Black and making it very clear that he would not be able to do what Red does, right?
and it's not just black. It's kind of the all of those that red sees as have an, let's say, an easy physiological elevated gain.
Right.
Now, it's a special alloy that prevents Goku from breaking it, right? But I also want to say that the only way that Red can instantiate himself larger than another spirit is to crush that other spirit instead of elevating his own, right?
Exactly.
I
And
think that's
so
gets to your point.
so yeah, with that said, right, with him telling Black, you have to stay down here and contend with Goku, right? After Red has watched him
Hint.
say, yeah, to content with him, after he said that, this is coming on the heels of the end of the previous episode where Black has listened to him say that, right? To say the Red Ribbon Army itself is not going to be bested by a kid who can't use an elevator. I feel like that's foreshadowing Black being able to put together what he does need to do to be able to break through that floor, right? And so as he's fighting Goku, Goku knocks him out the window and Goku dodges out of the way and then the floor comes down and crushes the room that they're in. And then essentially the top floor becomes the space they were in and they climb back in and then whenever Black climbs back in the window as he's listening to Red talk about what his wish is, he's then able to come up into that floor, right? Because Red has foolishly thought that by crushing down, right, by
Well,
essentially
he's low.
lowering the floor, right, lowering the floor of his space down onto them and erasing the space that they occupy, he thinks that the nature of his status is enough such that it defeats those below him just by the way that he's defined it, so to speak.
Well, in let's say in terms of bigness, something that's crushed, right, is still going to be smaller than something that's small.
Right,
And I do like what you were saying about Black having to hear the wish first before he's able to climb up,
right.
because it is the adoption of the red ribbon spirit by Black at that point to say that the let's say motives, or the motive being that Red is adopting, is not what is best for the Red Ribbon Army.
Exactly. And what he has to do is symbolically ascend through the floors without using the elevator. That's shooting him in the head, right? He takes it into his own hands and then actually breaks through the floor his own way, right? And so it's interesting how it foreshadows that as he's hearing him say, the Red Ribbon Army is not going to be bested by a kid who can't use an elevator. It's like he's realizing, I can't use an elevator to get to where Red is either. And then he gets left below by the elevator, right? And then ultimately, whenever he understands his wish was never to actually make the Red Ribbon Army stronger, but to make himself bigger, then he understands, oh, okay, I can contend with you on this level, right? And and instead of seeing him now as the general who you have to be, in his sense, a sycophant to, right? He then sees him as someone to actually contend with, and then does it in that room that he told him he couldn't get
Well,
into.
let's put it in terms of competence. It destroys Black's sense of Red's competence. And
Right.
therefore, since, let's say, and I would say this is definitely true of the Red Ribbon Army, where it isn't true of Pilaf, that the hierarchy therein of each of these structures is based on competence in one, the Red Ribbon Army, and it's not based on competence with Shu, Mai, and Pilaf.
I'm glad you mentioned Pilaf because one thing that I was thinking about as well that's different between Pilaf and Red is that Pilaf can't really articulate specifically what his goal is, right? And his goal is so broad that he can't speak it. But the downfall of Red is that his goal is so small that he's able to speak it out loud to himself, thinking that he's one, and then Black understands it immediately and sees how small his wish is. And so it's like Red has focused himself down to a very, very specific
See,
wish
I
that's
don't know. I don't.
not.
I don't know if Red's wish is as small as it seems. It because the whole idea of it is a physical instantiation of the elevation of one's gaze.
Right, it is, but it's a misinterpretation of what that elevation of your
Right.
gaze
Yeah. Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
That's why I call it small or foolish,
Okay.
because literally getting his wish is
Fair
not
enough.
gonna give him
Fair
what he
enough.
thinks it's going to give him, right? And so, yeah, I think that delineates him slightly from Pilaf because he is specified, right? But he's not specified in the right direction, and that's what this whole arc has kind of been about, right? How do you specify your aim?
How do you elevate it?
Exactly.
Sure. All right. So I think that's a good addendum piece. Anything else?
No, I think we can just finally wrap up what's going on with this conflict with the Red Ribbon Army.
Yeah, let's see what happens with old Black Chew, as we know him. So the Go crew approaches in Yamcha's plane. Meanwhile, Goku lies in the street. He's disoriented by Black's assault, Black now being in the power suit, the robot. In the air above, Black centers his crosshairs on Goku and aims the hand of his mech toward him. He fires a large blast that leaves a crater in the spot where Goku was lying. Below, the Red Ribbon soldiers begin to celebrate as Black cheers about his victory. On a building nearby, though, Goku watches the celebration. So, in the first little instance here, we already see that pattern that Goku adopts in allowing someone to project their spirit as much as they can, so that Goku can then take that and destroy it.
Right, and the situation where Goku has been cast down to the ground level by the mech, right? Like that's specifically what Black does as soon as he has control of it is he throws him down, right? And we had talked in the last episode about how getting in the mech, he elevates himself to look down at Goku, right? He doesn't elevate himself or his view specifically to elevate it, but he does it so he can look down at Goku.
Yeah,
And
well,
so he
he
casts him down like
his
that, right?
spirit is downward facing, let's say.
Right. And so we see like we were talking about before, the crosshairs, he takes them and like centers them on
Mhm,
Goku really
mhm.
slowly. And it's like he does an energy beam, right? In the same way that other characters have done it, like the Kamehameha or the Dodon Ray, right? He has his hand out and then he does a blast, and the blast that he can exert from his elevated position, um, technically, but also his elevated position in the army now to cast down at Goku with all the technology with the that the Red Ribbon Army has given him is powerful, right? It's
Well,
just that he misses because he's not able to, even though he thinks his aim is right, he still can't hit Goku, right?
and it's not just, I wouldn't say it's just the technology, because it is it is in emboldening, maybe not emboldening, but strengthening of one's spirit by adopting a unholy mode of being, and that's why he has the suit around him, right? Because it is a shell. He's
It's an
in a
extension
shell.
of his spirit, right?
Right. And so it's able to create these blasts, right? And it's kind of the pinnacle of what the Red Ribbon Army is supposed to be, right? It's that hyper disciplined merger of modern and militaristic sensibilities, right? And so Black here is perfectly doing that, and he thinks he's won. But I like that Goku here is watching them, because it is again that Goku's kind of measuring up the spirit that he's against.
Yeah, it's interesting because whenever Black cheers here too, he's cheering
He
on the Red Ribbon
breaks
Army.
form. He breaks form though.
He
You
does.
wouldn't see Red doing that
No.
in front of everyone. He would do that in private.
Right. He said I think he says long live the Red Ribbon Army or something like that when he's cheering, right? So you can see that he is he's still an automaton of the Red Ribbon Army
Yes.
right now,
Yeah,
right?
definitely. He's
Um
spiritually possessed.
as the crew is also approaching, it sort of sets up a situation where Oolong thinks that Goku's dead, right? And he comments again that it was dumb of Goku to have done this, right? To have gone and tried to challenge the army. And he says something along the lines of he needs to go back to kindergarten. And then Bulma turns to Oolong and says, "You got kicked out of your kindergarten, so you're one to talk, right?" And it's really funny how she says that because it's like so we've established a while back that symbol of Oolong being kicked out of kindergarten being in line with when Bulma becomes self-aware of sort of her own modesty. And so there's this funny thing about it where Oolong is like, "Oh, he's small in spirit and he needs to go and develop more." And Bulma's like, "You're small of spirit. Who are you to challenge the maturity of Goku?" Right?
Right,
And
yeah.
that shows where Bulma is right now too.
Yes, and it is to say also that she's kind of outgrown the facsimile of Oolong as because she now knows how Oolong is wrong. Instead of competing on the same level as Oolong like
Right.
they did in season 1 or in the quest for the Dragon Balls, let's say.
Yeah, I like seeing this because
It's
they
just small.
question why they're coming along on this trip, but there is a reason, and we're going to come back to this Oolong thing a little bit later in this episode too, because their interactions, I think, do fit within that framework we had talked about before.
What do you mean?
Later on, whenever they're talking and Oolong is being a coward and
Oh,
Bulma
okay, yeah, yeah, okay.
Bulma chastising him and stuff like that.
Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha. So, next we see Goku launch himself towards Black, and he lands on his mech's visor, the glass screen between him and the outside. When Black tries to punch him, he dodges, causing Black to punch himself through the glass. And it's almost mockery at this point, right?
He says, "You're
It,
so stupid."
embarrassed, Black launches himself upward, causing Goku to lose grip on the robot and land down below. Black charges a missile on his back and aims it down towards Goku, saying that he'll just have to destroy the base. So this is that point, right? This is that point where it's against being at all, against hierarchies at all. If I can't be on top, there's no hierarchy at all.
Right.
It misses and hits. Yeah, it misses and Goku. Does Goku kick it back? Oh, sorry. The soldiers on the ground panic at realizing that the base is going to be destroyed. They begin to scatter. Goku recognizes the missile as another bomb and intercepts it, kicking it back towards Black. It misses and hits the mountain behind him, destroying the top of it. In Yamcha's plane, the gang sees the explosion and wonders if it's a sign that Goku has been killed. Black attempts to flee, but Goku chases after him, bursting through the mech suit and causing it to explode, killing Black in the process. So this is the end. This is the end of the resistance the Red Ribbon Army is able to muster.
Right. This is as Black operates as a symbol of the Red Ribbon Army, Goku defeats the whole Red Ribbon Army by defeating the mech, right?
Yes.
Um,
All that's left of the spirit, because that's all that's left, really. There's the
right.
physical instantiation is mostly gone.
Yeah, I like that he he says, "I guess I'll just have to destroy the base," and then all of the Red Ribbon soldiers recognize what he's doing, and they all just panic, and they're like, they realize the jig is up, right? That it's no longer about the army, and all chaos just ensues, right? And they're all fleeing from the scene. Like they realize that this is not about the army at all anymore. This is just about Black, and that's why whenever he punched himself, he launched himself up really fast, right? Because it's that he's like, "Oh, I didn't beat you this time. I'll elevate myself even more because that's the only thing he knows how to do, right?" He's like,
Mm-hmm.
"I'll look down at you even more, and then I'll shoot down at you even harder."
Well, that's kind of how Red that's what he's adopting through Red's mode of being, right?
Right,
Is that same thing where Red would literally get his golf cart and elevate it above everyone so he could look down at them too, right?
right, and just to fit with the archetypal symbolism, whenever Goku deflects the bomb, it destroys a hierarchy, right?
Yes, exactly. Exactly the thing that I was saying, right? If I can't be on top of the hierarchy, there is no hierarchy. I'll just destroy the whole thing, right? Which is kind of that uh let's say equality, the issue with striving for perfect equality
Right.
because there's no
Mm.
hierarchies then.
This is the nihilism that comes with thinking that everything comes from sort of a power expression, right? Because, and that's why, specifically, it destroys the top of a mountain because it's Black saying, if I can't get what I want, then ultimately it was always just about my strength. It was always just about power. And the structure of the Red Ribbon Army itself is not something to be preserved because this is about me now.
Mhm. It's kind of his last resort
Right.
as a character. And so they wonder if he's been killed. Is this the part where not where he's a coward yet? Okay. Did you want to say anything about the gang flying?
No, it's just, again, Oolong. I don't know if it's here, but at one point it cuts to Oolong holding flowers whenever they see the explosion. And there's this, I think Bulma says like, "Why do you want him to be dead so badly?" Right? And it's this disconnection between Bulma, who's gone out without Puar and strengthened, and then seeing this like, not only does I said Puar, Bulma and Oolong, and not only does Oolong think that Goku's not making it, he wants Goku not to make it so he doesn't have to be along for this ride. And so he's resentful, and Bulma calls him out for it. And then another thing that's funny is as as it happens, they see the explosion, everybody reacts to it, and they're like, "Oh, what do you think's going on?" And Yamcha's steering the plane. He's like, "Okay, I'm gonna lower in altitude a bit." So he starts to lower slowly, and then it cuts to Roshi in the plane, and he acts like he's panicking, and then he like leans towards Bulma, and he gets smacked, and like he leans towards launch, and it's played as a gag, but it's funny because it shows that Roshi did it intentionally, right? That he's playing up a gag, that he's not reacting to the explosion because so much time has passed. Um,
We did Chris Sombra. We talked about the well, we didn't. I don't know if we talked about the robot's design too much. Actually, we talked about what it's supposed to mean. But what do you think about the design? I think that's a good thing to say before we move on as
well, let's
well.
see. It is a
I also want to mention though before we move on from that point, it's almost Roshi still being a master. He's still being a master to the women in that way, right? That they're beyond that now, and he knows that, but he's still testing them to see if they've learned the lesson.
right. He's testing to see if they'll let him get away with something that's obviously not a genuine reaction where he would cling to them. Let's say.
Mhm.
Uh, but yeah, the robot's design. So it's first of all, it's a purple robot, right? And it has a domed visor in it so that you can see the person piloting it sort of as like this, like almost like a bubble at the top of it, and it's a spherical view for them. um as far as the specificity of the design, I would say the main thing that stands out to me is one, the way that it's able to elevate itself so fast that Goku can't get a grip on it whenever he wants to do that to get away from him, right? And the the fact that it has that aiming reticle in it, that's slow, that display where it's sort of like the person who's up elevated looking down at everything with their view then looks down at a little screen, and they program in the orientation of the robot, which is to say like the person at the top of the hierarchy inside of the Red Ribbon Army sits there, and they're the person responsible for the aim of the army at the end of the day, right? And so it kind of acts that out in a sense.
Well, and it goes in line. My analysis of it goes in line with what we were saying about how it's a shell of the spirit of the Red Ribbon Army that's protecting Black in this instance, and that's the thing about a spirit, right? It's hard to latch onto. It's a lot less concrete, let's say, than what Goku's been fighting before this. And I like its round and pudgy design for that exact reason, right? It's almost and that's kind of why Goku loses his grip, right? He's not able to keep grip on the amorphous nature of what a spirit could represent.
And I also like the way that the dome represents sort of a separation between yourself and the other people. It's sort of like you're an image inside of the robot, but then that shell is broken whenever he punches himself in the face, right? And that's when he decides to turn against the army itself and then act as a self-serving person, because the barrier between the operator inside of the machine and the machine itself and the things outside of the machine is broken, right? And then it becomes, okay, well, my will really is ultimately sort of as a shadow expression, has always been about just trying to get what's mine, right?
Well, also, I want to mention how Goku destroys it. Right? He kind of realizes that the spirit that Black is embodying is not one that can be grasped and pinned down, but one that has to be confronted and let's say punched through.
Just like robot.
Right? Just like a robot, just like what the pirate robot, just like Metallotron. Right? All of them had to be pierced through in order for them to be defeated. And so here we see that same thing.
Right. It's not that he kills Black necessarily, but the destruction of the machine that Black
Was
is
all that was
using
keeping
destroys
Black
him.
alive
Yeah.
anyways, right? So it kind of goes hand in hand.
Right.
All right. So I think that's that. Let's move on. So On the ground, Goku gazes at the 2 Dragon Balls he's retrieved and tries to use the Dragon Radar to find the last one. Unfortunately, the radar doesn't show anything. Meanwhile, the crew and Yamcha's plane finally come into the view of the Red Ribbon base. Yamcha decides to land out of sight to avoid being ambushed. On the ground, Roshi tells everyone that they need to have a plan. Oolong fakes a stomachache to avoid the battle. Launch says she wants to rush in and slaughter them. And then Yamcha asks if Launch is really a girl.
So in this segment, that's kind of what I was talking about with Oolong, where so you remember what Bulma did to lose her capsules back in the day was that she gave Oolong a candy that made it so that if she ridiculed him, right, if she said PP or if she called him piggy, then he would have to go use the bathroom, right? He would grasp his stomach and run off. And so now he does it to himself, right? She doesn't have to ridicule him. He ridicules himself for her whenever they're on the ground. He knows his cowardice, his smallness and spirit now because Bulma knows the smallness and spirit of what he represents.
Yes. And that's why she's kind of moved on, right? And she's, at this point, finally almost ready to get her capsules back.
Right.
Almost. We're almost there. There's one little thing she has to do first.
Right. But it's so great because she's standing there ridiculing him for pretending, right, for pretending to be sick so that he won't have to go into this encounter while holding a shotgun. Like it's symbolically it's very apt, I would say, because
she's learned to unsheath her sword, right? And Oolong is still just the same creature he's always been.
Right, and it wasn't that long ago whenever Bulma said, "I don't want to go on this adventure anymore with you, Goku," but whenever the call arose, she answered it, right?
Right, and I mean this is under the pretense that Goku is actually in danger at this point.
Exactly.
He was in danger, but I mean at this point he's good. He's done.
But as far as they know, this is dire situation that they're going into.
Definitely.
But let's roll it back to Goku trying to see the last Dragon
There's
Ball
the
here,
cat.
right?
I didn't know the cat was still there.
Right, it shows the cat striding across and knocking over all of the pieces on the chessboard and then screeching in the empty room, which is very symbolic of what's happened, right? Because what Red has been doing this entire time is playing these games by himself, and he's everything's a game to Red at the end of the day, and that's how we see that he's not that higher level of malice. And so at the end of the day, the game's over, right?
Yeah.
And so the pieces get knocked over by the cat that he had with him, and it's basically like, and now chaos reigns, and now it's back to the unknown. Like your logos was not sufficient, and the game has concluded.
Yeah. And this hierarchy is destroyed now too. The Red
Mhm.
Ribbon hierarchy. So yeah. No, I like that. But Goku not being able to find the balls, I think that's what you were
It's
about
a
to say.
mystery right now for us, right? That this is the first time that someone has looked at the radar and the radar works, but they're not able to find Dragon Balls, right? It's usually a case of like, oh, the radar got broken in this fight or something along those lines. But Goku doesn't say it at this point. He's not like, oh, the radar is broken. He's just like, huh, why
And
won't it
there's
work?
also nothing that would be able to destroy his gaze that he's encountered at the point. So, like, from an audience perspective, it's possible to already know that the Dragon Ball or the Dragon Radar is not broken. Let's say it's already been hinted at because of that fact. Goku hasn't encountered anything that's changed the way he sees the world.
Right. And this is to say, and we're going to see this as we move forward into the next saga, that simply defeating the Red Ribbon Army and what Red represented is not enough for Goku to deal with the gravity of what Tao Pai Pai was able to do in killing Bora. Right. That's a
Definitely,
higher
yeah.
level than this.
Yeah,
So we had talked
definitely
about
higher
how
level.
it was kind of just a foregone conclusion that Goku was going to be able to win this fight. And that's because the fight that he had with Tao Pai Pai was a higher level fight than this.
Yes, and it's kind of why it gets flashed back to so many times in the series. But I think we're good to go ahead, right?
Yeah.
All right. So, next we see the gang sits in a circle discussing what the best plan would be to approach the base. Ooh, there's one thing I want to mention from the last part though. Yamcha asking Launch if she's really a girl
Right.
is it kind of shows how he's kind of more like Oolong right now, in the Oolong Bulma Poir tangle,
Well,
let's
there's
say
something that he
analogy.
doesn't know, right? He wasn't along for the General Blue saga.
And that's exactly why he's ignorant, right?
And
Yeah.
so he doesn't see the way that launch acts to be an aspect of the feminine, right?
And the thing is, he could have gone on the journey, but Bulma didn't want him to, so he was like, "I guess I won't go."
Right.
hmm And so here he shows his let's say ignorance of female spirits because he assumes that a female spirit cannot be aggressive in the way that Launch is aggressive in the masculine sense.
Right, because he wasn't there to see how Bulma learned how to integrate that and still be a feminine spirit, right?
hmm Just want to mention it.
That's good.
Uh, let's see. Yeah, so they're discussing the best plan to approach the Red Ribbon base. Roshi suggests that Bulma take her clothes off to distract the soldiers. Oolong suggests the oldest go first, whereas Roshi suggests the weakest goes first. Oolong suggests the most perverted, and Roshi tells him that it would be him. Pretty good banter here. And it is to say that there is a level on which Roshi and Oolong have a competitive um, level, and it is that blindness that Roshi's adopted in the way that he acts, right, towards women because of the deprivation that he's had from that, because of his instantiation as the spiritual father, right? He has that, um, but it's a more holy thing that what Oolong does, right? And that's kind of why I think Roshi gets the best of him at this point, right?
Yeah, well, it's to say like, well, you're old, you're weak, you're perverted, you're more perverted, and it's this kind of play back and forth where um Roshi hasn't fulfilled his archetypal role for this story, and
Not yet, yeah.
so he is spiritually not as strong as he could be, right? And that's a big flaw in Oolong is that he's being cowardly. Now that's not to say that Roshi's being cowardly. Roshi's taking on the responsibility of seeing after a student here, right? Um, but in what he's doing, and they call him out for it, that this isn't a time to be joking, is he's still being blind, right? He's not focused on saving Goku. He's focused on, well, whatever it would be, right? Bulma naked, for instance, right?
Right, exactly. And part of it I think too is because and I guess we'll see later on kind of a contradiction of this, but he kind of acts as if Goku is going to be fine.
It seems
Out of everyone in the group, he's the one that just kind of acts as if Goku will be fine.
it's like he knows that Goku will be fine, but he doesn't know that Goku would be able to take on the Red Ribbon Army.
Mhm.
He has faith that
He'll be able
Goku will be able to survive the encounter, but he doesn't have faith that Goku would be a stronger spirit.
Yeah. And I think that part of it is because of how Goku's shown the strength of his spirit already, and Roshi's able to measure spirits pretty well. And right, I think that kind of brings us to the end of this section,
Halfway through.
except they argue, and Goku flies overhead on the Nimbus, remarking that he'll need to find a way to get back to Bulma to get the radar fixed. Krillin sees him and mistakes him for the Red Ribbon Army. Yamcha has Par put the plane back into a capsule and they hide before realizing it's Goku and calling out to him.
So I do want to point out here again, Krillin sees someone flying overhead, immediately thinks that it's a threat and wants to hide. Right? He did it before whenever the gang found him swimming on the way to town because they didn't have a vehicle. And
Well,
so,
only after his run-in with Blue did he start acting like that, right?
mhm.
After he understood the knowledge of malice in the world, was he kind of afraid of it and afraid of the unknown?
Not only that, but afraid from the attack from above, right?
hmm
And I think that that's his defeat at the hands of Blue, and Blue as this high-ranking official in an army really is, like you had said, it's symbolic of the space that he is in his progression as a spirit, right? Like he's been isolated and training his body, but he hasn't been confronting chaos, right? And
Exactly.
his fear exists. He he doesn't believe that he's the strongest anymore, right? And he knows that he hasn't earned the ability to confront that witches of him that would come down and challenge him, right? And so what Goku has learned, right, which is like, oh, you might be stronger than me. I'll let you beat me up, and I'll figure out what I need to know to become stronger. Krillin runs away whenever the challenge from above appears to him, and so it's so strong that he mistakes the gang originally for a threat, and now he sees Goku on the Nimbus and immediately mistakes him for the Red Ribbon Army. Which is to say, he doesn't know yet what Goku's strength means, right? He sees Goku up in the sky flying after this battle as the victor of the battle, and then he thinks there's no way it could be Goku because the spirit that's up there and that strong would be a malicious spirit, let's say. Because he doesn't have the wisdom that Goku has about the elevated mode of being something that's not just, I don't want to say that Krillin thinks it's just power, but Krillin hasn't learned how it's not just power, right?
Krillin hasn't learned really what Master Roshi's spirit is either, and I think that's part of the reason why he's remained there with him and trained with him, right? Thinking there's more wisdom to get out of this, and it's not being taught by Roshi, but embodying that Roshi mode of being where Roshi sets chaos into order, and Krillin is not embodying that, and so he's kind of not he hasn't I don't want to say he's regressed, but he's pretty much stayed the same since the end of the tournament.
He's limited by trying to be
He
like
does
Roshi.
get some insight with Blue, and that's to say that the malice in the world is and can be a step above what Krillin is, right? And so that's why, right, looking down, looking up, he becomes afraid of those threats around him. And so they all hide, but it's just Goku and they call out to
I
him.
do like that Yamcha has to call out to Poir to put the plane back into a capsule, right? It's definitely still stays with that symbolism of her being almost like a disintegrated anima projection, where it's like put the potential back in the seed, you know, because you are my chaotic piece that's dissociated, right? So he hides and he has her go and get the plane back for him, rather than him just like clicking a button and having the capsule go back in it. They do it deliberately that way, right?
Mhm. And so they call out to Goku and he responds. Now they're all back together again. And the gang, oh, sorry. And Goku lands and finds the crew is upset with him for trying something so reckless. Yamcha says that he made the right choice by deciding not to challenge the Red Ribbon Army. Goku tells him that not only did he challenge them, but he beat them and took the 2 Dragon Balls they had. In disbelief, Yamcha sends Par to scout the base to see if it's true. When Par returns and corroborates Goku's story, Launch immediately sneezes, turning back into Blue Launch and asking if they're out for a picnic. Por takes her aside to explain everything. It's a pretty funny part.
I like this sequence
Yeah.
because it's like at first Yamcha. Well, let's say the first thing is that Bulma is angry with Goku,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because Oolong was angry that he had to come along, but Bulma was angry at Goku for risking himself. And so he doesn't understand what's going on. He's like, "What's wrong?" Right? And they're like, "You made us come all the way out here because you were being foolish and you went and did something that you were going to get yourself hurt." And then Yamcha is like, "Oh, it's a good thing you didn't do it because it was too dangerous." And then, of course, there's no way he can even believe the tale, right? Now, literally, it's like who would believe that a kid went and beat up an entire army? But more specifically, Yamcha has considered himself to be someone who could challenge Goku, right? He
Mm-hmm.
thinks of himself as Goku's rival. And so he has no idea what this means. So he sends Poir out to go and see what, like, if it's verifiable that Goku could be that strong, right? So he has to.
It's something that he hasn't considered. It's just like it's kind of the idea that we're unaware of motive beings that we're unaware of. The unknown unknowns, right? Known knowns and known unknowns, but there's also unknown unknowns. And that's definitely something for Yamcha here. And so since it's unknown unknown, he has to send who but Poir to see it first of all, because it's that chaos interacted, right? That feminine externalization that can interact with it. And she goes to find it and comes back and corroborates Goku's story.
It definitely makes me think about the story of the Buddha when he goes out and he finds enlightenment and then he returns, and whenever the people see him, they're like, they can just see by the way he is. They're like, "Are you a god?" And he's like, "No, I'm awake." And it's
Mm-hmm.
that it's the mode of being that is transcendent. It's so high that you don't understand what it is, and so it's automatically godlike, right? And so like Yamcha has to search his
Yes,
feelings to see
I
if
think
it's
that's
true,
a
right?
good way to put it. Yeah,
And Goku has attained that enlightenment now by climbing Korin's tower and finding the real mode of being underneath sort of the teachings that he
I
was
mean, I
getting.
would say by deciding to uh, resurrect Bora, that's really
Right, yeah.
what did it. I would say that's the crux of it.
Ultimately, that being his aim
Yeah.
and being able to act out that aim, right? It's two
Yes.
different things, right? Because the elevation of your view and having that as your aim is one thing, but then also knowing what it would mean to act in a way that would elevate you and get that done in the world is another aspect of it, right? Because it's one thing to say, like, now I see all of the good in the world, but it's a certain amount of responsibility you have to take on to manifest it in the world, right? And so
And it comes
Goku
with
has already gone through
understanding.
both of those things.
It comes with it comes with understanding um how to map spirits, and that's exactly what he learns from Korin, right? And that's exactly what someone would need to be able to resurrect or rescue the spirit of the father, is to be able to remap that spirit, right? And
Right,
so that's what I would say. But the last thing I want to mention here is Blue Launch coming about.
right,
Now, I think Blue Launch has to come about here because Launch in this way is a perfect embodiment of femininity in the way that the chaotic calls forth what is necessary at the time. And now that the threat has passed, Blue Launch can return because Blonde Launch is not necessary at the time right now.
well, and archetypally, her role here now is to nourish Goku, right?
Exactly. Now that he's returned as well, and now that's kind of capped on the story, right? During times of struggle, right, that feminine aspect can be masculine to in order to, let's say, defend children, right? In this
Exactly.
instance, exactly. Um, and but again, the feminine can also be nurturing, and that's what we see her change into because it's what is called forth at the time.
And that's why she says, "Oh, are we out for a picnic?" Right? Because that's what her spirit as Blue Launch is manifest to
Hmm.
do, right? Is to be here to nourish. And so, and then of course it's Poir who then takes her aside to catch her up on what's going on because Poir is sort of Poir being that feminine aspect of Yamcha has come along and has gone and mapped out what is going on, right? And that's what Yamcha did with sending Poir out was like, hey, go map for me the unknown, go map
Hmm.
the chaotic, so that how would I say it's a strength that Yamcha has that he can command that aspect of himself to go and understand
Well,
something like
no,
that,
I
and
would
then
say this. How can one discover the unknown unknowns? You have someone would have to employ unknown means to discover unknown things, right? And so that's kind of why I was saying about Poir having to go out there. It's not a mode of being like you said with Siddhartha that is understandable by Yamcha at this point. And so he has to use unknown means in the form of Poir to interact with it and bring that knowledge from the edge of chaos into being. And that is
right,
part of the reason why Yamcha is still a strong character here in this time.
definitely, yeah.
And so let's go ahead and get to almost the last of it here because Goku. Oh no, this would be the last of it. Yeah, this is the last of it. Goku reveals he becomes stronger by climbing Korin's tower and drinking the super spirit water. Roshi remembers his own time trying to get the water and tells Goku it had taken him 3 years. Goku tells Bulma to fix the radar, and she asks if he still hasn't found his grandpa's ball. Goku tells her about the encounter with Tao, and she says they will need to go back to Kame House first. On the way back to the island, Roshi comments that Goku may even be stronger than he now. Yamcha says that they won't stand a chance in the Tenkaichi if they all do if all they do is continue their light training, which we kind of mentioned earlier. Unspiritual training, I think, would be a more precise way to put that.
Right.
So he decides to join Goku in his search for the last Dragon Ball, and Krillin agrees, and that's exactly what Yamcha's spirit needs. So it's kind of serendipitous that way. He should have gone out the first time with them. On the Nimbus, Goku promises again that he will return and revive Bora.
I like that that the thing that Bulma asks Goku is if he still hasn't found his grandpa's ball, because she doesn't know that his goal has transcended that, right? That it's gone beyond just the personal
Mm-hmm.
and it's become transpersonal. And
It
so
has to be mentioned specifically, and then Goku mentions Tao, which is what we were saying earlier, right? Which is the impetus.
for elevating beyond that personal, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so I also want to say Roshi remembering his time climbing the tower. We get to see a young Roshi. I think this is the first time we see it.
It looks a lot like Yamcha, right?
Looks yeah, a bit like Yamcha. And so
We can see that he's blind then too, which is interesting. He's always got the shades
well
on.
he I think it's because he's done that he's actually able to get to the top of the tower, right? It's because he's self-inflicted that blindness to gain the wisdom that it takes to elevate vision. But he was a scoundrel when he was trying to get the water right. He would cheat and stuff.
Well, that's why it took him 3 years,
Yeah,
right? Because
exactly.
he was essential, and that's the thing. You can Goku figures out what to do while his eyes are closed, right? It's when he's asleep at night that he wakes up and has his vision, and then he also imitates Korin while his eyes are closed and he's not watching him. So it would make sense that someone who has that sort of blindness innate to their character would be able to get the super spirit water. It's just that
It took him a
I
while.
think of that scene when Goku's standing there like Solaire praising the sun, and
Uh-huh.
Roshi with his sunglasses on can't quite get there,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
There's a certain
Not
level
with
of
the glasses
blindness
on.
that
Yeah, I
is
see.
limiting him to see as far as Goku was even able to see when he was up there.
Mhm.
But yeah, I like that it shows that sort of training type montage, and it shows the panning shots the way that it did before with
With
Goku
Goku,
chasing it.
yeah.
And it shows the seasons pass, and Roshi's flabbergasted, right? He's like, "Are you serious? You actually climbed the tower?" And then he goes, "Oh, I see now." Because he understands then that if Goku went and climbed the tower, there's no telling how powerful he is.
Then he could easily defeat the Red Ribbon Army. And that's kind of what we said earlier. There's a foregone conclusion he would win.
Right.
Uh, Now, one thing I want to say is Roshi commenting that Goku's might be stronger than him now, right? That's to say that the spiritual father, right, can be contended with when the hero has adopted that proper aim. And by doing so, Goku has elevated his spirit such that he is a hero now, right? To the point where a hero and the spiritual father are maybe not equal, but they're definitely vying for spiritual power, let's say, if they were to contend with each other.
Well, Goku's a literal hero now in a way that he wasn't, right? Like he had saved the world, so to speak, but not intentionally because it was as Uzeru that he was able to stop Pilaf before, right?
Right.
And then we saw he trained and then he competed and he did all these different things. But now Goku has gone and done a really heroic, he's embodied that heroic deed. And this is the first time that he's consciously done a major heroic deed the way that he has. And so whenever Roshi sees he's not just potentially a hero, he is a hero now.
He's the hero, the
He is
archetypal
the
hero,
archetypal hero,
right?
right?
Exactly. That which
Um,
redeems the blind. I mean, the blind father, even still,
right.
or the spiritual father, the
That
ancestral
redeems
father
the
that
father
redeems,
spirit, yeah.
for sure.
And that's why he says maybe he's stronger than me. It's like maybe his spirit, which I taught, can supersede mine and create the good that's better than the good that
Well,
I could
and
do.
that's to say, right, specifically, right, is this power of redemption as strong as the power of wisdom? And it's hard to say. They're both of them are pretty powerful, right? So I think that's just one thing I wanted to mention here.
Yeah.
Um
And then Yamcha, of course,
mhm.
whenever he's told that, he
His
comments.
spirit is then emboldened.
Right, he comments, "Well, I considered myself to be Goku's rival until recently, and now I recognize that if I stick with this light training, right, because he's been civilized, he's been in society playing baseball and doing all of his he's been a social beast, so to speak. Um, he realizes that that's not enough and that going out and confronting that chaos can make you infinitely stronger, right? And that's what's been missing for him this whole time. And Krillin, in hearing that, he's like, he recognizes as well,
Especially because
that's
his
where my
failure.
limitation is.
Yeah, I guess especially because Krillin's failure against Blue, let's say.
Right.
And so, one last thing, and it's mentioned again because it's so important, and it's why I keep bringing it up. Goku says that he will return and revive Bora.
Right.
That is instantiated. It has to be that.
That's the last thing that happens this season because this is what it's really about, right?
Mhm.
It's not just about beating the Red Ribbon Army. It's about
It's
they
not
were a
about
means to an end.
yeah. Well, and it's not about revenge. Now, one thing I do want to mention before we just kind of leave the Red Ribbon Army altogether, kind of at the end of this episode, is and we talked about it briefly, Goku's sin in adopting malice to use against the Red Ribbon Army.
Right. And not just going and getting the Dragon Balls and continuing for the sake of Bora. Right.
And I just want to mention here that because we're going to talk about it later, we're going to continue on with that idea and how it expands and how one poison seed can, and I like using the word seed, or one poison cell, for example, can multiply and create issues.
It's a good way to put it.
All right. Anything else?
No, I think that puts a nice little bow on it because we're not done with the instantiation of the Red Ribbon Army, but we are done with the initial manifestation that Red was able to conceive of. Right.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. All right. Well, please give us a subscribe if you liked what you heard. Give us a like. Comment if you disagree with anything. We'd love to hear what you had to say. Uh, I think this was a pretty successful episode, and this is the very end of the Red Ribbon Army arc, so we hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to be on the lookout for our future episodes. We're also on Rumble, so give us a subscrungle. I think that's pretty much it, eh?
Yeah.
All right. I'm your host on the Left Owl.
I'm your host on the right, Brock.
We hope you guys have a good night.